Fictional Page presents On Thoughts, or Thinking is Too Hard, by W.H. Maxwell. Read by the author. A quick word from the author before we begin tonight's episode. First, thank you. Your viewership keeps us going. If you want to support us and our stories, please recommend us to a friend. It's the best way to show your support. And now, happy little bus ride. Happy Little Bus Ride by W.H. Maxwell.
The kids would just get grinded to paste, really. Everyone thrown to the side like a giant cheese grater, mushed against the side of the road like potatoes, tossed to the floor. Nah, there's not much in the med kit for that. These were words I had not expected to hear on a Monday morning while visiting my son at school. Worse still, as I looked around, I seemed to be the only one hearing them. My wife had thought it would be a fun idea to sign me up as a chaperone for my son's elementary school trip to the local theater. It was, after all, a half-hour event only 3 minutes from the school. What could possibly go wrong? Apparently, according to our bus driver, a lot. After being assigned our little groups to watch over, myself and the other parents who, due to whatever failure somewhere along the path of life, left them available on a Monday afternoon in September, began to usher the children behind the teacher and toward the bus. One little boy in the class rushed a few feet ahead to stand next to an older man in his late 60s, and together they helped everyone inside. The two reminded us every 4 seconds to use the handrail for all 3 of the bus's miniature steps. Raising my children to follow safety instructions, I stoically thought of myself as a kind of everyday hero when I did not pull my cell phone out, an act that we had been instructed was prohibited during the field trip, and instead focused on our bus driver who followed the last student aboard. There, up front, he stood poised in the center of the aisle, like some bus gnome, hastily closing us inside to reveal his master plan. Wide-waisted jeans fitting snugly over a collared polo shirt, this was our driver for the day, Bob. Bob Sr., as we would learn. Bob Jr. being the not-present father of the little boy, Robert, who had run forward earlier. Robert, Bob, and their variations seemed to be an unspoken thing in this family. Both Bob Sr. and Bob Jr. had married women named Roberta. I made that last part up, but it wouldn't have surprised me. Once at the head of the bus, Bob Sr. began his safety tour of the bus. A necessary act, surely, when transporting 12 children and 5 adults 7 city blocks. "Hey there, fellas," he began. "I'm Bob Babberschmackett, and I'm Robbie's grandpa." By this point, every adult was 20 seconds into the blue glow of their phones, while the 5- and 6-year-olds proceeded to degrade into a pitch of noises reserved for small woodland critters. I was both engulfed on all sides, and yet utterly alone. It was solely Bob Sr. and myself having this conversation, something I'm sure we were both aware of, but that he seemed to be blissfully ignoring. "Now, before we get started, there are just a few safety tips I would like to go over. I know it's a short ride, and we're not supposed to take the highway. They've been pretty clear with me about that. But it's important we go over these things well in advance. Why, I always make sure each of my grandkids knows the ins and outs of the buses before they ride or drive one." This last part seemed a bit off, but I nodded like I'd been trained to do all my life when listening to someone speak. "I used to be a bus driver for the city school systems for 43 years, until I retired last fall," Bob Sr. went on. "Since then, I've mostly been working part-time for these sorts of things, and it's been great, because I get to see the grandkids." He affectionately turned towards Robbie, his grandson, who was picking his nose and staring vacantly out the window. I envied his lack of self-awareness. "Now, the crucial thing to remember is that there are 3 exits in a bus: the front, sides, and back. However," he paused abruptly, looked at his watch, and then began to turn and head for the driver's seat. "I'll finish the rest as we go," Bob Sr. said, turning on the engine and sliding the bus into gear. "Don't want to be late for our show, right, kids?" When no one said anything, he laughed at the lack of response and began to drive the bus forward. I had foolishly thought he was done for a moment, about to look around and see if anyone needed any chaperoning, when Bob Sr. picked back up again. He threw his voice louder and heavier this time, so that it carried through the bus.
His eyes were fixed upon the overhead mirror that bus drivers had so that they could see behind them, into the interior of the bus. From there he watched like a hawk, catching my eye only briefly as he scanned the crowd of kids. Presumably for any mischief, however, I was beginning to have my doubts. He was in it for the attention. He wanted an audience, and when there was none, he imagined the responses. I could begin to see it all as I sat there listening.
Anyways, he said, the back exit seems appealing to most people. Often they go for that one. However, the door sticks and has to be pushed, usually by an adult, and there's a steep drop. Most kids just can't push it open. If the bus goes out and into the water, a lot of kids rush for the back door. It's the part still sticking up out of the water, right?
I assume this last part was rhetorical and not a real question, but he waited a moment anyways before going ahead.
So they rush for the back, and then they can't get the door open. Whole bus sinks. Happens all the time. Now the side doors...
Did it? I wondered. Did buses go over the water all the time? It seemed like a bit of hyperbole at best, but pure exaggeration at worst.
The side doors open easy, but then again, the sides are their own kind of risk on account of the lack of the seat belts. The doors are fine, sure, assuming you can get them open. But, and this happens all the time, if you're on the highway and the bus flips to the side, boom, it's done.
At this point, I was looking around. Every child was in their own little kingdom, none of which crossed over with Bob Sr.'s, and all of the adults seemed equally distracted by their phones. Even Mrs. Schnaschenspecker, the teacher, was staring into her open purse at something that looked a lot like YouTube from the reflection off her glasses.
The kids would just get grinded to paste, really. All those windows, everyone thrown to the side like a giant cheese grater, mushed against the side of the road like potatoes tossed to the floor. No, there's not much in the med kit for that.
Now Bob Sr. was making direct eye contact with me. Not in some malevolent way or anything sinister, but more a, "what you gonna do?" sort of expression. I looked around again, doing a full 360. Between my son, Mrs. Schnaschenspecker, little Robbie, anyone, was anyone else hearing this? Am I completely alone with the sociopath? We were now passing over the little bridge into town, the one that had the on-ramp to the highway right before it, and I watched as we came closer.
They told me I can't go on the highway anymore and that the theater is too close. I mean, they always say don't go on the highway, but sometimes the bus just does its own thing, you know?
I nodded, expressionless, not sure what else to do.
So avoid the back doors and avoid the side windows if the bus is still in motion or on the water. Also, keep in mind,
and he extended his right arm to the point at the little white box fixed above the dashboard.
We do have a medical kit on the bus. There are some bandages, some antiseptic, and a blanket in there for anyone who gets wounded.
Wounded? I was frowning now. We passed by the entrance to the freeway and I sighed a little. But really, how far did he think we were going? And why would we be wounded? This is a 20-mile-an-hour zone both ways. The theater was in view and less than a minute away. Or I hoped. Something about Bob Sr. gave me the idea the man had been waiting those 43 years for a disaster he never got to witness. Or make happen. Was this his chance now?
But that won't do any real good, he said. Those bandages won't stop serious wounds. A big head gash or an impalement? Nah, those little strips of cotton can't stop blood like that. Best to just call 911 and direct them to the scene. That is, of course, if you're in good enough condition. Keep that in mind, kids.
We came to a stop in front of the theater. Noticing the change in the sound and motion around them, the children quieted and the adults picked their heads back up.
Okay, everybody, Bob Sr. said. I hope you guys had a great ride, short little trip there, and I'll be waiting here until you guys come back out, okay? Keep your hands on the railing all the way down now. Okay, all 3 steps.
I turned and leaned towards the teacher, keeping my voice down. Did you hear any of that? I asked. Sorry, what was that? She said, slightly startled. I looked and saw Bob Sr. smiling and waving at everyone as they departed, each little hand tightly gripping the railing on the way down. Nothing. Never mind, I said. But she had already moved on. Thank you for listening, and I hope you have enjoyed this production of Thinking is Too Hard by W.H. Maxwell. Hey, that's me. Look, Ma, I'm on the internet. I'm just kidding. She's not listening. But you are, and thank you for that. This is my first real attempt at anything humorous, at least since my circumcision at age 35, and it's always a bit weird putting yourself out there, even more so when no one is laughing. Are the jokes funny? I don't know. If you like my work, however, please recommend us to a friend, which is by far the best thing you can do to support us. If you want to go a step further, check out my Patreon at Fictional Page, where you can see upcoming and never-before-seen works, some of which I don't think I will ever publish. It's kind of like getting to read over my shoulder while I'm working, except it won't be awkward and lead to a life-shattering decision in a human resources office involving lots of tears and pointing to body parts on a doll. We also have a website at www.fictionalpage.com with lots of art and links to my stories posted. Thank you again for listening, and until next time. Fictional